I'm Deputy City Manager and Director of Development Services in Escondido. As the Mayor already mentioned, you'll be hearing an informational item about efforts to develop a citywide energy roadmap. In 2023, the city solicited proposals from experienced and qualified energy service companies, also known as ESCOs, for the development and implementation of a citywide energy roadmap. As you'll hear, the purpose of the energy roadmap is to modernize the energy infrastructure required for essential city services, improve energy efficiency, increase renewable energy production, promote operational efficiency, and help eliminate the structural deficit. The upcoming presentation will introduce you to potential projects across city operations, including our water and wastewater facilities. As the city faces a multitude of rising cost pressures, modernizing energy infrastructure will allow the city to redirect existing utility budgets toward projects that pay for themselves and produce a positive net impact for the general fund and enterprise funds. The prioritized scope of work you'll learn about tonight was developed in collaboration with staff over the last 10 months. The funding plan proposed explores a combination of potential funding sources, including grants, financing, and city capital, including future Measure I revenue. The city will recoup its investment with guaranteed savings over the life of the new equipment. There is no formal action for you to take this evening. The upcoming presentation is meant to update you on the work done by our partner and city staff to develop the roadmap and to give you an opportunity to provide any feedback that you wish. You'll see a proposed schedule that includes future City Council consideration of projects to implement the roadmap and funding opportunities for those projects. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ashley Lowe and Tyler Gertman from Climate Tech, and they're going to walk you through the roadmap.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy City Manager McKinney. Mayor White, Deputy Mayor, City Manager McGlynn, members of staff and council members, thank you for having us here tonight. As Deputy City Manager McKinney described, over the last 10 months, we've been working with your staff to develop a citywide energy roadmap. And a big part of that effort has been to get really clear about what the city's objectives are and understand what the most critical infrastructure needs are. And tonight we're going to share a preliminary scope of work with you that, based on your direction on how to pursue the funding plan, we would then finalize and bring back to you for consideration at a later date for potential implementation. The program goals are aligned with the council priorities. For really, a main focus is about eliminating the structural deficit by reducing operating expenditures and relieving capital budget pressure. Modernizing failing infrastructure and critical infrastructure is also going to help you to improve essential city services and to promote public safety. And moving towards more renewable energy technologies will also allow you to improve safety with having backup power solutions in the event of power shutoffs and help you to just further protect yourself from rising utility costs. This slide here shows the process to date. In March of 2024 is when we were formally selected through an RFP process for a citywide energy roadmap. The RFP process was very specific in that the city wanted to have an energy services partner help to design, implement, identify funding solutions, and actually measure the savings after implementation. So a true turnkey solution from start to finish. There's two main stages of that. First is the development. We first do a preliminary assessment, and then based on the direction of, after presenting with the options to you tonight, we would then finalize it and bring it back for implementation. This kind of shows the critical steps and the milestones that we've taken to date. We're going to share with you the utility analysis, the findings of the engineering site assessments, the preliminary scope of work, and then also get into next steps after tonight's meeting. The city's SDG&E expenditures are about $9 million per year, and since this baseline, which was in 2023, they've raised about 9% since then. This shows in the pie chart each fund how much an SDG&E expenditures each uses. with the majority being for general fund facilities for city buildings and parks, and then it shows water and wastewater and street lights. Over the past 5 years, rates have increased by more than 40%. And what we understand, especially in the wake of wildfires in California, that insurance premiums and fire mitigation strategies that the utilities are going to have to implement, rates are expected to increase at the same or higher rates than they have been, which is an average about 8% per year. In addressing energy infrastructure, the city has kind of two paths that it can take. One path is kind of the path that the city has been down, and that is just addressing things as things break, or piecemealing projects through available funds in the CIP plan, but not really getting ahead of rising utility costs. And so this shows just kind of doing things the way that you've always done, or deferring it, the impact that your utility budget would experience in the range of 5 to 10%, which is the average over the last 5 years. So it's showing if you're spending $9 million today, and by 2040, that's going to be doubled if the rates go up 5%, which is more conservative than what we've been seeing. If they go up 10%, you would be your bills in 2040 would be $45 million. In addition to the just your utility expenditures, there's also a big cost to operating failing infrastructure in terms of maintenance and staff time, and just an overall impact to the operational efficiency of the city to keep older infrastructure running. Doing things on a piecemeal basis also has an implication on construction costs and inflation and the availability of affordable construction delivery methods. So what we're going to share with you tonight is a more comprehensive approach that would allow you to mitigate rising utility costs and redirect these funds that you would be paying to the utility to your infrastructure through a more comprehensive approach.
I think one thing to add on to that as well is just the cost of inflation in construction projects, 10, 15% year over year, not to mention what it's going to be, sadly, after the LA fires in terms of steel and cost and just labor in essentials. And so we have other cities, customers that we're working with that are very focused on what is that going to do a year or two from now, and probably higher than 10 to 15%. So getting projects done today has a price efficiency and effectiveness for cities and public entities throughout the country, and specifically, obviously, for Escondido. Over the last 10 months, we've taken the opportunity to talk with Public Works, Water, Wastewater, Parks, and Rec, and the various different teams from Kyle, Reed, Angie, Joe, and the teams to really understand their critical needs through, obviously providing the essential services that the city provides. And it really boils down to these 8 categories that you can really funnel it all through. We're going to talk about each one a little bit more specifically as we walk through this. But when you look at these 8 categories, it's about $150 million of need through these categories at this time in terms of approximate budget for that. That is a lot of need for a city like Escondido, especially with the financials and the financing of the city. So breaking it down really from HVAC, building automation systems, all the way to microgrid systems, as Ashley mentioned, for your command center, for some of the critical infrastructure, to improving wastewater processes for new permits and mandates that are coming down from the state. All of this looking at it together in a comprehensive manner. If we go to the next slide, I'll show some pictures of Escondido's infrastructure in terms of the older building automation systems from the 60s and 70s that really don't allow staff to stay on top of turning things off and making sure things are not running. And slowly the city is progressing with the building automation system. It's about expanding that and giving them the tools to really manage their assets better and to reduce energy, but also improve health and safety within the spaces. Next is heating and cooling systems. So heating and cooling systems have about 15 years of life. Many of your systems are over 20 years old, and staff, Joe and the team have been doing a great job just keeping them alive, but they need to be revitalized, not to mention the state has basically...
They're still stuck on the dial.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the dial. You have in your home. Exactly.
At 80 degrees.
Yeah, Exactly.
It's stuck there.
No, that's a unit trying to get up to, or get down to 72 degrees. But yeah, I'll go slower so you can go through. The older infrastructure here, in terms of 20 years old, plus the refrigerant is banned. So even some of the units that you have can't even be maintained and operated efficiently. They have to be replaced in terms of it, and that would be encompassed within this initial phase as well. But you just see the aged infrastructure here throughout some of your facilities. Next is the lighting. The city has done a good job of updating quite a few fixtures to LED lighting, but there's still about 4,500 fixtures that need to be modernized to LED technology, which would obviously reduce utility spend by 50% for those fixtures, but also improve safety, especially through parks, like the lights in the bottom left are Kit Carson, just improving walkability and safety throughout the parks, at the same time reducing energy as well.
And giving a consistent feel throughout facilities, having the same temperature.
Same color lights, the same color lights. And another thing here, the state has mandated that after January 1st, 2025, you can no longer buy fluorescent fixtures. So some of these lights have to be replaced and modernized to LED technology. So it's just something to be aware of in terms of just where the mandates are going from the state, pushing to newer technologies through Title 24 compliance. Roofing systems, talking with staff about where the leaky roofs are at and trying to take a prioritization scale of that. And we're touching some of the essential ones and critical ones within this type of program, but not obviously to the extent that's needed. But you'll see, obviously it looks decent from a picture, but in terms of leaks and what needs to be done, they need to be recoated or redone in their entirety. Water treatment, Angie and the team and Reed have done a great job at really trying to dial in their efficiency as much as possible. So when you're looking at water treatment enhancements in the water infrastructure in itself, it's really modernizing pumps to more efficient pumps, VFDs, improving control, looking at the overall flow of water throughout your systems and making it more efficient in coordination with the teams there, but they're doing a great job. And wastewater treatment, through the permitting process with the state, nutrient removal, some of these items that are going to be coming about here for them in the near future, and really helping the staff to get technologies in place to better control the processes, the flow of waste coming into their systems, and providing them some newer technologies that is getting them to the point of where they're going to have to be based on state mandates. At the same time, obviously reducing cost and efficiency as well. So just various different technologies there. These are just some examples of solar installations. We've looked across, obviously the city has invested into some solar at various different sites, but really looking to add additional solar to really hedge against SDG&E's utility rate increases. Obviously sustainability efforts is a big piece of this. But shade, EV charging, many locations including parks and main city services looking at charging, as well as providing infrastructure for fleet as that transition occurs. Again, another state mandate that's being pushed on the fleet to electrify those types of vehicles and helping. It's a chicken and the egg thing with EV and being able to help with the infrastructure so that the fleet can come along with EV vehicles. So this is just I'm not going to go through this in depth here, but again, the overall comprehensive need of meeting with everybody is around $150 million within just the buckets that we identified. However, when you look at this critical initial phase, it's roughly about a third of that overall need, a part of this program that can be addressed today and really help get ahead versus being reactive in terms of fixing and piecemealing these projects.
So we worked with staff and through multiple scope iterations to identify what is the most critical need. What are projects that you're going to be doing anyway in your CIP plan over the next few years, and ways that you could do it more efficiently through a program like this and reduce that capital budget pressure on the CIP. So what you're seeing over the next couple slides in the funding plan is the prioritized scope of work. It's not addressing all of the need, but we believe what's not here right now are things that could be deferred, for a few years, basically.
And a continuation of the details of the different enterprise and working with Angie and her teams regarding these types of enhancements. And as we progress through the detailed assessment, which will be the next step, we'd be able to really fine tune this as well, especially with your feedback here tonight.
This is the preliminary, funding overview of the prioritized scope of work that we just reviewed. Depending on how various elements of the scope of work that we reviewed, like we mentioned, it's still preliminary, and there's several elements to still vet out. But in the range of about 50 to 70 million, depending on how the scope is finalized, we believe is within a 90 to 95% accuracy of what your prioritized scope is that we heard from your staff. Over the life of that equipment, which is 15 years for your energy efficiency improvements and 30 years for renewable technology, those systems will generate in the range of about 80 to 100 million in savings over the life cycle. Those savings can then be used to pay back the city for however it chooses to invest and what funding sources it chooses to use. Some cities already have capital set aside in CIP budgets. Some cities, a lot of cities that have passed, tax measures in the recent election are looking for ways to leverage those through annual contributions. There's a number of grants and incentives. But what you see here are potential funding sources based on what cities with similar infrastructure needs and similar budget priorities, the types of funding sources that they're pursuing. An equipment lease purchase, or sometimes it can be structured as a green energy bond. Basically how they're structured is that the equipment or a real estate asset could be used as the collateral and then to fund the projects up front, so you can take care of all of the needs at today's construction prices and get those implemented over a 2-year period, and then over each year pay that back with savings. Different than other projects that you may have done in the past where there wasn't a performance guarantee for the repayment source, this is specifically structured, and your RFP was very specific, that the city is looking to have a guaranteed savings agreement associated with this. So what that means is that the implementing contractor, Climate Tech, is responsible for providing you a not to exceed price. So however the project is finalized, the not to exceed price, if there's any change orders, we would be responsible for those change orders and to mitigate any type of price uncertainty risk for the city. And then we're also responsible for the savings. So we have to provide a guaranteed not to exceed price and guaranteed savings. And then those savings are measured annually and used as a repayment source for any type of financing mechanism that was pursued. Or in the event that if you used restricted city capital that was already budgeted, or a portion of Measure I, the savings could then pay back the city for those investments. I think it'd be good to stop here just to answer any questions on how that funding plan is structured or any elements of the scope of work, and then we can kind of dive in deeper into an example of how energy savings has worked for a pilot program that we did for the city back in 2010. We did a pilot program for the city. So but I just wanted to pause there and see if there's any questions that you might have.
Not yet.
Okay. So back in 2010 is when a climate action initiative was first kind of conceptualized by the city. And the idea was at the time was to do a pilot program of the lowest hanging fruit at just select facilities, not a citywide program, and do it in such a way that the savings could be validated over a several-year period to see how the approach worked. So a pilot program where the proof could be in the pudding, and then have the savings validated by a third party. So we were fortunate to work with the city for this initial pilot program. It was back in 2010, and then a year after implementation, the savings were tracked and monitored, and you had a third-party consultant validate the savings to see what the actual performance was. The intent at the time was to then pursue a more citywide type of effort to address the rest of your needs, but I think just for a number of reasons. A lot of turnover, changes in city priorities, and I don't need to go into all the changes that have happened over the last decade and a half, but the project could never really regain momentum until the last couple years, I think, with the current administration really wanting to make some major headway on this, and as rates have quadrupled since this time, it's more of a have to do rather than a nice to do in today's current climate. So this is showing you right here an excerpt from the report of your third party. And you see right there what circled is the percent of the guarantee. It shows 178% of what we had guaranteed for the measures at these 5 facilities. Generally we're going to be conservative with our savings estimates because we're guaranteeing it that if you don't realize the savings that we write you a check for the difference. Generally, our average is that we see our guarantees at about 120%. Yours performed better than typical. There's not an intent to completely understate the savings. This just happened to perform a lot better, and I think it's because it was a lot of low-hanging fruit that helped you to operate a lot more efficiently than you were before. And basically, that's just kind of in a nutshell how a savings guarantee would work. In addition to measuring the savings, staying on as a long-term partner after the phase of work is implemented, we also stay on as a partner to help with community engagement and sharing your story, applying for grants and recognition and other elements related to various scope measures in your project to help you share the story with your community. These are examples of 2 cities that have now dedicated websites for their energy roadmap. Some cities call it an energy infrastructure modernization program or a energy modernization program. These are 2 programs that they have a dedicated website that's tracking and measuring the savings, showing what efforts the city has made in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other feats of basically the projects that are implemented. And this is just an example.
Real quick, the reason why this is because a lot of the infrastructure that the city is doing is not necessarily seen by the community. So it's always important to share, online what is being done, and whether it's through PR, releases or on the website, but it's your story, even whether it's additional to this project, all the sewer infrastructure enhancements that you're doing, et cetera. Telling that story in a way that is right in your website for the community to see is really what we've come along with other cities to do, like up here.
So after tonight and sharing the preliminary assessment with you, the next step in the process after you've deliberated and spoken more about this with staff would be to actually pursue seeking financing proposals to see what type of options are available for various funding mechanisms. Then from there we could put together multiple options for you to consider, and some of the options might be, okay, what would the scenario look like if you financed half of the project and then used other city funds for half, or what if you financed 75% and internal funds for 25, or the inverse of that. There's many different ways that you could go about it, so we would be looking for some direction on what you think is a responsible way to go about funding this in a way that's conservative. We want to have the savings structured to not only pay for the payment, but also provide a net positive impact for the general fund and enterprise funds. So once we get that direction from you, we can then work with your finance team to solicit financing proposals. Climate Tech is not a financier. We don't have an interest in the financing, but there are a number of private lending institutions that have a strong interest in funding public sector infrastructure projects because they get a tax incentive for giving you a reduced rate, basically. So it's considered low interest financing in the major banks of the world, B of A, US Bank, there's local banks as well that specialize in funding energy roadmaps, would probably express interest. So those could be explored. At the same time, concurrently as we're seeking funding proposals, we would go back out with our engineering team to fine tune all the elements of the scope of work that we shared with tonight and that staff expressed was, their priorities to finalize the scope of work, be able to provide a not to exceed price, be able to provide a guaranteed savings estimate on an annual basis, and at that point is when we would be able to give a lot more details on the price and savings at whatever granular level that you wanted to see it. After finalizing the scope of work and reviewing the funding proposals, generally a city would have another workshop to review the fine-tuned scope of work and funding plan before actually proceeding with consideration for implementing the program. This gives you a kind of best case scenario how quickly we can move. This may not line up with your required timeline, so really this can be structured at whatever timeline that is best suited for your needs. The idea was to, if you wanted to get this done and approved before the end of the fiscal year so you could start the new fiscal year with this program in motion, it does give you a better chance of being able to go after some of the current federal incentives that we believe are going to stay in place for the next couple of years, but will not be renewed after that.
A lot of detail.
Yeah, a lot of detail here, but we'll open it up now for questions.
Do we have any public comments on this one? Okay. Yeah, council?
No, I don't.
Questions?
Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
I have a question. How long before the city begins to see savings?
The savings you start to see in construction as measures go online. We call this the construction savings. So as soon as lighting measures start to go online, you start to see the savings as they go on. Our true guarantee period, where we're actually guaranteeing your first year, would not take place until the construction is considered closed out and we can officially turn over, operations for that infrastructure to the city. But we would start tracking it immediately during construction, and we would structure the first payment if you decided to pursue a financing mechanism like a municipal lease purchase or something like that. You would want to structure it in such a way that the payment is not due until after the savings have been realized. So usually about 2 years after.
All right. And if I understood correctly, it was mentioned about having protection in case of a power shutoff or a loss of power.
Yes.
Correct.
How is that through batteries? How does that work?
So it's through a microgrid system. Right now, currently, it's targeted to be at the EVCC building, City Hall, and Public Works. And so right when the power shut off, there's an automatic transfer switch that turns on the generator, and the generator will run the entire city load. Currently, right now, either the buildings don't have a generator or they're undersized for the entire load and cannot operate in a full capacity. And so having full capacity is huge and very important for cities these days in resiliency.
There's a generator.
That would be a generator.
Yeah.
Correct.
Running on
Natural gas.
natural gas.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good
Those
question.
conclude my questions.
Hi there, I do have some questions. Thank you for the presentation. On the slide that talks about preliminary funding options, if we can go to that, please. So when you talk about the total project, how many years are we talking about? Is that
To get that done?
Right.
Yes,
What's the years for total project completion, and then what does that kind of amount to on an annual basis? Should we start in the next fiscal year?
let's say if this were to get approved before the end of this fiscal year for implementation.
Following your timeline, yeah.
Yeah, the construction timeline is going to be 2 to 3 years, right? So this would the funding sources itself would be budgeted over 3 fiscal years.
Okay.
So it's getting approximately, you'd see about 25% in the first year, because there's a lot of final, permitting and engineering and equipment procurement that needs to take place in that first year as we're mobilizing. You'd see about 50% of it get done in the second year, and then finishing for about another 6 months, the latter 25%. But you can budget for that over 3 years for the initial capital, any capital that would be contributed. And then the financing mechanisms, if that was something that you chose to pursue, we see cities structure them as 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years. Some cities even, doing longer, for 30 years. You wouldn't want to go longer than 30 years for assets like the solar. You don't want to go longer than the useful life of the asset. But that would be paid over a time period that you select the funding time period, the term.
Got it, thank you. And so can you just share like a little bit about your company?
Sure.
How long you've been doing this, how many cities
Absolutely.
you've helped? Yeah. Kind of, you gave 2 examples of success stories, but like, how long have you been in
Yeah.
business?
Yeah.
Tell, what is your success kind of portfolio?
Sure.
And as well as, I'm really just, some of the things that really stood out to me that I really appreciate is the community engagement education, because I think the city does, we're a full service city, so we do so much that our residents don't know that we do, and I just feel like it's such a great opportunity for us to proactively share what we're doing. So I'm assuming that that's also included as far as like, fixed costs,
Yes,
right?
it's a
And
value
guaranteed
to
savings, that this is actually something you do during the entire life of the three fiscal years that we're
Yes.
with you?
Correct.
Okay, so we have you
Part
kind of
of the
also doing
program,
this in
yeah.
parallel.
Yeah.
Ye-
Yep.
Yes, so this is a value-added service. It's not added to the construction costs. We have, a marketing budget that we allocate towards helping our customers tell their stories. But just to get back to, who we are. So Climatech has been operating under the Climatech name since 1974. And we have an office in Poway, 6 offices in California, a headquarters in Arizona. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Bosch, the global technology and engineering leader. Bosch is, a $100 billion multinational conglomerate. What's different about Bosch compared to many other, big corporations like that is that it's privately held. So it's not kind of subject to the quarterly shareholders, pressures that a lot of other energy service companies may be, that are publicly traded. One of the big differences between Climatech and other energy service companies, I think, too, is just that we've been operating and this is the same name and standing behind our agreements, since 1974, whereas a lot of companies in this space are often bought, sold, and restructured, or changing their name. So that's just a little bit about what makes us different. I think another thing that makes us different is how we go about measuring and verifying the savings. There's different approaches that an accredited energy service company can take when they're measuring savings, and we're accredited by the National Association of Energy Service Companies. That was one of the minimum requirements in your RFP, and also on the U.S. Department of Energy. We're also accredited by the U.S. DOE. One of the other things that we do a little bit differently is how we measure and verify the savings. It's traditional in this industry to give energy savings projections based on an engineering model that's stipulated they'll give you a book, and because their book and their engineering estimate said that that's what you were going to save, that's what you save, because it's pre-agreed to. We do our energy savings guarantees based on what's called International Measurement and Verification Protocols Option C, which measures your savings before the project, after the project, on a bill-to-bill comparison per meter. So what that's a fancy way of saying that it's savings you can actually see on your bill, and that's why you see something like this. We're measuring truly based on what you're spending before compared to after, and we'll stand. We welcome even third-party validation, and I think that's why we continue to get multi-phase relationships. We get invited. We did this phase 1 15 years ago because it went well. We got invited back, to do another phase of work. A lot of our projects that we do in the city space are because we're getting invited back because we delivered on our initial promises. We work with other, large cities of similar population, like the City of Ontario, City of Santa Clarita. We work with a number of other communities locally. For the Escondido Union High School District, we've done 4 phases of work, Valley Center Palma, Ramona, Lakeside Union. So a lot of SDG&E projects, and we could of course share more if you want to hear more, but.
Two quick things. We work with only public entities in terms of our division. Okay, so we understand public entities, the ins and outs of working after hours, working in different ways to keep services up. And one thing with Bosch is we're a debt-free company. With companies kind of going out of business, we're debt-free. We've been around for over 50 years. We're here to stay. We're playing the long game. So I just thought that was
That's
important.
important, yeah, thank you, impressive. I'm impressed, and because I was wondering, how does one, like, what's your business model, how
It's
is that
very niche.
sustainable?
Sure.
But it seems like you
very
know what you're
niche.
doing, and you've been doing it a long time, so I appreciate you sharing those details.
Tyler and I have been working together 15 years,
Yeah.
so.
You know, because sometimes it sounds too good to be true.
I know.
Right, you gotta ask those questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I think I have a couple. I mean, I think you've answered almost all of them, which is great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. This is impressive. So obviously, when you're talking about lifespans of different assets, I mean, it's obviously going to depend on the asset, right? If you're talking about roofing, solar, you know, it's all going to be different depending on what it is that we're talking about. So in terms of each asset, though, I mean, I'm guessing, is it like standard lifespan? So if you're talking about different heat pumps, if you're talking about solar, if you're talking about all that, is it like a standard of lifespan for each asset, or do you exceed, or what's the, where are you all?
There's industry standards out there like
Industry.
ASHRAE for HVAC, BAS, lighting, things along those lines. That's what we follow in terms of the life. We understand that some of these systems will actually last longer than the quoted life on a piece of paper. Like your staff has been able to keep alive for years.
Sure.
But we cut it off conservatively at that point
Okay.
when we do calculations for these.
So it's the
projects.
assumption that it's going to last up to that
Correct.
year,
And
but
then
oftentimes it'll
And then
exceed.
some. Yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know. So, and that's pretty, I'm guessing that's pretty typical.
It's pretty
That's
standard.
what- Yeah.
It's pretty standard.
In terms of the microgrids, we're looking at, you know, you're talking about what's it called, generators and everything like that. Do you guys also do battery storage on a micro scale? We're talking about something like
On a micro scale.
That's a million kilowatts per hour or something like that.
Yeah, even smaller.
Okay.
What we look at, because battery storage is very niche in terms of how you calculate if it financially makes sense, or even if you need it on a facility.
Sure.
Because of how SDG&E and the CPUC charge cities like yourself. It's basically, you have to look at it and analyze it on an hourly basis. So there's only a minute amount of sites that would really financially benefit from a small scale energy storage system that would also store your solar power at that site and use it in
That's what I'm
off
talking about,
times.
yes.
But when you look at emergency backups like microgrids, there's just nothing better than generator and an ATS switch and using natural gas to really help keep that system up and operational for 24/7.
Okay, so you would have, I mean, are
It's
both
both
options
within
that-
this
and that's my question
program,
right
with
there.
the specific need, with those specific facilities.
Absolutely, we're not putting
Yeah,
it on
oh,
a
yeah.
single family house where, yes.
Yeah, exactly, and they're safe and, yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's good to know, that's the other thing that I wanted to know. And then, you know, you had alluded to this earlier in the presentation, we're talking about resource acquisition, right? If we're talking about the projection of costs, I mean,
Yeah.
what's your projection or estimates of the cost of, let's say, solar panel or these renewable sources within the next 5 years? Do you have?
It's-
And I
No,
think I
no,
know
no,
the
no.
answer, but.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at steel since 2021 has gone up over 50%. Steel is a main part of what holds renewable energy. So even though the panels could come down in cost and more manufacturing within the United States, it's the other components that go behind the renewable energy that the costs are going up. So the overall project cost, we think it's higher than 10 to 15%, but we like to be conservative with that estimate, and that's what we're seeing year over year. We're also seeing lead times of equipment still be long, especially in the electrical sector of transformers, of inverters, of renewable energy technologies, generators. Those are taking even up to a year. So if you purchase them today,
Yep.
you're getting them a year from now. So you really need to plan ahead, and that's where this is kind of coming along.
So would in your expertise, would you suggest doing to be more aggressive front loading than just carry on within, 3 to 5 years?
That would be a recommendation. If you look at your overall need, you have about 150 million.
Yeah.
This is just taking that first tranche of critical infrastructure that's been collaborated with staff to get to the place of actually being in par with state standards, mandates, efficient technologies, Title 24 recommendations. So you're really just getting to the point, and then you can decide in a few years to go on from here. The good thing about this type of design build project is when and if you make the decision to proceed with implementation for whatever dollar amount, it's locked in at that price with us, Climate Tech, over that 2-year period of time to complete all of that project over 2 years, especially on the labor and equipment piece. So you're locking it in at today's dollar, we're implementing it over 2 to 3 years, and you're getting those projects done, even though they're spread out over.
Which would
It's still a long-term
prevent-
plan,
yes.
but you're locking that price in, and you're able to get ahead of this at, to get up to par.
In most cities, like, let's say out of the work that we're doing, 60% is work you're gonna be doing anyway
Yep.
over the next 3 to 5 years. For most cities that have, strained staff resources, like Escondido is, like what we've seen is, we're gonna be getting it done in 2 to 3 years. Doing it in-house is gonna be exponentially longer if it even can get done. Because there's just simply not enough bandwidth. So that's one of the we don't calculate that in our savings,
Sure.
but
Sure.
it's just
You can't
another
calculate.
additional financial
that's a-
benefit of considering to do this in-house or how you would traditionally do it, it's gonna take a lot longer, and in the meantime,
Flatly, we
prices
couldn't get it.
go.
Just hire more people.
Yeah, there you go.
And
You-
and you know how cheap that is.
Yeah, it would be difficult to calculate the opportunity cost of.
Yeah, when we did this, kind of the cost of doing nothing over here, this is truly just your utilities.
Right.
So you know that at a minimum, if rates raise at a lower rate than they've raised over the last 10 years,
Yes.
you're gonna, by 2040, it'll be double just for SDG&E.
And so one of the examples that Tyler has stated is this, before the LA fires, they were actually pulling back, meaning the state, on some of the undergrounding requirements for some of the utilities. That is going to change, but the challenge with that is undergrounding is a huge expense, and that means that expense is going to come back and be passed on to the customers, right? So right there in itself, undergrounding work is going to raise rates across the board, because it is now, the necessity is going to be even bigger
Greater,
to get
yeah.
that work done.
And premiums,
Yes,
yeah.
that's it.
I don't have any questions. What direction are you looking for specifically tonight?
Well, the city managers wanted to open this because we're going to be sitting down and having our retreat in a few weeks' time, and we're figuring out what our next steps are going to be. So this is the reason I wanted to open this conversation as we think about what we're going to do, how we're going to allocate resources. This is one of the areas that has been not without a lot of heartache, and I'm looking at Joe right now, been deferred consistently across the organization. And I think some of those pictures that, while amusing, also show where we're at across the organization. So what I'm looking for when we come into the retreat is, what are we prioritizing? What do we need to get further information on? We have an opportunity to really change some things in the community. This would be an element of how we get ahead of some of our deferred space. It's not without costs that we have to go through and figure out. We now have some ability to think about some things that we haven't thought about in the past, which includes financing, not just a direct capital investment. We probably wouldn't be here today, I would say, without that opportunity in front of us. But we restore capacity, we're able to move ahead. Those are things we can do with a project like this that we could take a real advantage of and really move ourselves into a much better position as an organization and a better service provider for the community. So that's why I wanted to make sure we had this conversation and the next conversation before we sat down and came into what our work plan for the next 12 to 24 months looks like.
And from Climate Tech's perspective, this preliminary assessment that we developed, as stated in our RFP, we did this at our risk and we will develop and finalize the detailed scope of work and finalize the scope of work. Also, at our risk, even when we do the detailed assessment, which would be the next phase, there's no development costs associated with us taking this to the next step to fine tune the scope of work. We're doing this truly, in good faith that this is a long-term partnership and there's a general intent to want to implement a program. So to date, there's been no obligation. So you can appreciate that before we take this to the next stage and devote a considerable amount of engineering resources and time and energy on our organization's plate to finalize the scope of work, we just want to make sure we're going in the right direction, that we're not developing a scope that's not palatable or exceeds what's palatable. We really want to make sure that we have your priorities very clear. We know exactly what you're comfortable biting off before we take that next step. If and when it goes towards implementation, I just kind of wanted to throw this out there so it's clear, so you understand kind of what our interest is in this. We work under the design build contract. Let's say you did a $50 million project or a $25 million project, whatever the amount is. Climate Tech charges a 5% profit fee on that turnkey project amount, and that's how we keep our lights on, and that's the financial interest that we have in this. There's no exit fees or penalties if you decided not to implement. And again, like I mentioned, we don't have an interest in the financing. That's a complete pass-through. So I just want to make that clear, so you understand. They're not thinking like, what's the catch, and what are they trying
Is
to
that
do?
5% fixed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Awesome, thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you
Looking
for
forward to
having
working
us.
with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zach. Do you need me to do anything?
Oh, you're
You're good? Okay.
It's a little chilly, right?
Yes, it is.
All right, we'll move on to our general plan workshop.
No, it's just easy stuff. All right, well, good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. Veronica Morones, I'm our city planner, and I'm here this evening to give you a general plan workshop. So it's going to be quite an adventure. So just an overview of what we're going to experience this evening. I'm going to lead with an objective of this workshop that I would like for everyone to take away. We're going to delve into what is a general plan, starting at the basics. Why do we have one and why do we need one? Then we'll launch into the city's current general plan, which we will call the 2012 general plan. We'll go have a high-level overview. We'll talk about some of the limitations, issues, concerns associated with the existing general plan. We're going to then talk generally about general plan implementation, what it takes to update a general plan, what next steps may be, and then some Q&A. If at any point you have questions, please feel free to interject. The Q&A, though, is definitely there at the end if you'd like to save them. So our objective this evening is really just understanding the what, why, and how of general plans. Additionally, I'd like for us to walk away with some level of familiarity beyond what you may have currently on the city's general plan, and then understanding where we go from here. So first, what is a general plan? This is a legal underpinning for land use decisions within the city. It's a broad vision for how the community will grow. It contains a significant amount of goals, policies that relate to various facets of community life. And it is an informational tool for everyone, the public, members of the community who live, work, and play here, decision makers like yourself, city staff. It is an actual literal text document. I do have a binder. I didn't bring it. Usually I like to bring it so you can see it, but I only use a digital version these days. So you can find that digital version on our website. I actually link it in this PowerPoint. So if you ever get a hold of this PowerPoint, which I'm happy to share, you could have a direct link. It's a giant text document comprised of multiple chapters. State law does mandate what topics are in the general plan, You'll hear me refer to these as elements. That's how the state government code refers to them. Our general plan, we call them chapters. Of those state mandated topics, there's a total of 9, 7 of which are mandatory for every jurisdiction within the state. 2 of those 9 are triggered elements. So there is, if this condition is present in your jurisdiction, then you need to have one or both of these additional chapters or elements. And then a jurisdiction is free to have optional elements, so topical areas that aren't mandated by state law, but the jurisdiction finds as a priority for their community. So this figure on this slide is out of our general plan directly. We have a great color palette of pea green, and you can tell I love it. And so what this does is on the left-hand column, these are the 7 mandatory topical areas that every jurisdiction has to cover. On the right-hand column, those are our chapters. So you can see we don't use the exact naming convention that the state does, but this is meant to map that the state mandated land use topic is our land use and community forum chapter. And you can also see that some of our chapters cover multiple of those topical elements. So for example, the safety element and the noise element, those mandatory topics live in one of our chapters, the community protection chapter. In addition, the city has, if you stay on the right-hand column, 3 optional elements. So again, these aren't mandated topics. We've opted to have them in addition: community health and services, growth management, and economic prosperity. And then if you move over to the left-hand side, environmental justice and air quality are those 2 mandatory elements that have to be triggered. So in this instance, just to give some context, the city of Escondido has triggered environmental justice as a topical area for our general plan. The requirement for this topical area is from 2017, so it actually came after the last comprehensive update that we did. So we don't have that currently in our general plan. Air quality, we do not trigger. That is a geographically specific area, San Joaquin Air Basin. If you are a jurisdiction in there, then you have to have an air quality element. We are not, so we do not need to have one. Specifically speaking to environmental justice, Senate Bill 1000 is the state Senate bill that mandated this requirement. This is triggered by when a community has what the state refers to as disadvantaged communities, and they use metrics from public health and income levels. They overlap those and they identify communities, and if you have some of those communities in your jurisdiction, you trigger this requirement, and we do. So again, just continuing on this topic of elements or mandatory topics, while there are up to 9 that a city may be required to have, they are not always required to be updated on the same schedule. Some actually have their own unique updating schedule. The most prominent one that some of you may remember is the housing element. The housing element has its own schedule for updating every 8 years. Our safety element is now actually in government code tied to the housing element, so it must also be updated on a very frequent schedule. And then our open space element also under state law has to be updated in this instance by January of 2026. You can see that our last city updates for some of these are recent, some are currently underway, and some haven't been touched since 2012. While I have a little asterisk on here because while our safety element is currently being updated and is on its own updating cycle, we are also working on a focused update to our mobility and infrastructure element. That's not mandated, but it is something that's occurring as part of our comprehensive active transportation strategy. So we do have some general plan changes in the works.
Clarification question. On the element, when you mentioned that there's like mandated and then there's extra ones that can be added, does those come from a list, the extras that could be added, or can a jurisdiction add one, like food and security?
Exactly.
Would that be one?
It's fully open to
Okay.
jurisdictional preference.
Got it, thank you.
So what is a general plan? Again, this is a document that's going to have a vast array of goals that provide the framework, right? They set the foundation, they set the stage for policies, which then are going to inform how we implement the general plan. So this graphic is not my own, so I'm sure you guys are gonna love it. But the idea here is that this general plan sets these goals, and then we develop these policies that are built upon those goals. The things that actually work to implement these policies are things like master plans, right? So all of our parks, well, most of our parks, I should say, have a master planning document that drills in further into detail on how that park will be developed, what will be in there. We have design guidelines. Specifically, we have design guidelines for our historic neighborhood, Old Escondido neighborhood, on how the resource conservation goals and policies for historic resources within the city, this drills down to a very detailed level. It's an implementation tool. We have pedestrian and bicycle master plans. These are just some examples of what we have that work to implement the general plan. So why do we need one? Why do we have one? One, it's a state law requirement, and it's a requirement of every jurisdiction, whether you're a charter city or you're a general law city, county, city, you have to have a general plan, and it has to have those mandatory topics. Again, it's this foundation, right? It's a foundational document for local decision-making and for physical development of the city. It also provides a specific participation and engagement opportunity for the community to be involved in public policy development. And ideally, these documents, the general plan, promotes better projects, both private projects as well as public projects, streamlines processes, and specifically, we'll talk about this later, but can streamline environmental review for both public and private projects, and improves access and use of available resources by identifying those resources, setting standards for those resources, service requirements for those resources at a very high level. So, our 2012 general plan, which is when it was last comprehensively updated, was something that is now over, what year is it? Over 10 years old. Yes, portions of which had to go to a vote by the people in order to be fully approved and adopted.
I'm sorry, how often do cities typically update their general?
Ooh, that is, it absolutely can vary. So I will tell you, Oceanside, some of their elements haven't been updated in 30, 40 years.
Oh.
But they are working on a comprehensive update. I will tell you that when I came to City of Escondido, I was like, 2012, that's not bad. It's worse. Our general plan does have a build out, like a horizon year that we project our build out through, and that's 2035. And it establishes quality of life standards, which we're gonna go into more in depth. This graphic on this slide is our land use map. So I'm not gonna get into the full details, but every general plan has to have a land use map in it. That is a mandatory criteria. So this is our land use map, and it tells you exactly what it sounds like. What land uses can go where and at what intensity can they go in at. So quality of life standards. These are minimum thresholds that we've identified for service levels of public improvements and facilities for the city. So the goal of these is really to ensure that there's adequate service levels, and that these adequate service levels are maintained throughout that 2035 build-out year, right? So on your right, you have an example out of the general plan of one of these quality of life standards. We have 11 of them throughout the general plan. This example is water systems. It's a lot of text, but I want to just point out that it does reference an actual quantitative value, right? 540 gallons per day per household, or as otherwise established by a document that would further drill down and implement the general plan to this at least minimum standard. In the blue box, these are the 11 quality of life standards that the topics that we identify. I don't have a slide that goes through all of them, but we're happy to provide those more in depth if needed via email. So, just a high level overview. On the left of this table, we have each one of our chapters, the number of goals in each of those chapters, and then the number of policies that seek to support and build out or flesh out those goals. So as an example, we'll just look at the first line, land use and community forum. That chapter identifies 18 overarching goals. To me, that doesn't sound like a lot. It seems reasonable. But each one of those goals has a series of policies that are tucked under it in order to facilitate the city achieving that goal, And that turns into 123 overarching policies for just the land use element, right? So you can see there's a lot of direction, there's a lot of policy that gets identified within the general plan with the overarching idea that it's broad brush strokes, because there are going to be further implementing documents on these policies, built off these policies. So on the right hand of this slide is just an example of a goal out of the land use element. It's on the topic of environmental review, the policies that seek to support that goal, and I've just highlighted at the bottom that these policies tie into the quality of life standards, right? So there is a consistent theme throughout the general plan, interwoven through the chapters and through the topic areas. So getting into some limitations on our existing general plan, it is over 10 years old, which is subjective. As I said, there are other general plans that are much older, but really what matters the most is how that affects our community. And what does that 12 years plus mean to us and the city of Escondido? So in 12 years, a lot has happened, right? There's been significant demographic shifts in the city itself. As someone who grew up here, it's very different than when I grew up here now in terms of demographics. COVID-19, the pandemic, is something that really created a very expeditious shift in those demographics in the last few years, right? There was a phenomenon of folks leaving dense urban city centers to go more into semi-rural, suburban life because they wanted distance, they wanted to get out of those dense areas. There have also been significant economic market shifts. The cost of development, as we just heard, right, has significantly changed in just the last few years, much less the last 10 plus years. And the economic drivers that were identified in the 2012 general plan were based on just that, right, 2012, and aren't necessarily reflecting the current market trends and economic drivers. So for example, in the 2012 general plan, you have a significant amount of identified area for industrial uses, office uses, commercial uses that the market just isn't working toward at this point in time. And then there's been a lot of policy changes at the state level. So 2012, Housing Crisis Act bills hadn't come out yet. Those hadn't been through the legislature. California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, did exist, but a lot of case law and a lot of amendments to that legislation have happened over the last decade that just aren't reflected in our general plan. Some issues and concerns that staff have identified. We have a prolonged implementation of our general plan. What does that mean? That's a nice way of saying that from the 2012 general plan, city staff have generally struggled to implement the full needed implementation of it through policy documents. So the most accessible example is our zoning code and our zoning map. So if you recall back to one of the slides, I had a map on there and I called it our land use map. That's the first layer of mapping that we do for land use. The implementation map, that's the sister map to that, is called our zoning map. And that drills down much more in detail. So if the land use map, for example, says housing should go there, and it should be low density, single family, the zoning map is going to create potentially 3 to 5 different types of low density housing based on product type or development standards, and that gets layered on top. Under state law, these things have to be consistent. So you can't have residential land use with an industrial zoning on top of it. We've struggled to bring that map into consistency since 2012. Same with our zoning code, the way that the code is written, the permits that we process, et cetera, should be consistent with the goals and policies of the general plan. We also have there are issues or concerns surrounding the amount of privately initiated general plan amendments through the private development community in an effort to meet current market demands, because our land use map and our general plan designations are not meeting contemporaneous needs, right? So a lot of what we're seeing in the planning division and development services is requests for high-density residential land uses in places where we had office designated, or we had some sort of office commercial mixed type of use. These types of private general plan amendments aren't necessarily an issue unless you potentially get high volumes of them, because it can lead potentially to piecemeal patterns of development. It also has the potential to erode the vision of the general plan, because the general plan didn't anticipate that there. They didn't anticipate high density residential development in that portion. And the general plan's vision specifically talks about putting all of our high density in the downtown specific plan areas. So our actual downtown specific plan, our South Center City specific plan, and our recently adopted East Valley specific plan, that we have said that's where our major RENA values are gonna go, our housing units that get mandated to us by the state. So that, if we think back to that map, high density in the center, low density in the outer peripherals, right? Private development, privately led general plan amendments just create potential for that to become a little less tied to the original vision of the general plan. And then significant challenges we're facing surrounding our current general plan are things like Proposition S, which is the proposition that mandates we go back to the ballot. It is a restriction on residential density increases. So the private general plan amendments we're seeing are not necessarily triggering Proposition S, but Proposition S does present an obstacle for a lot of private developers, property owners looking to develop their land, and maybe can't necessarily do so in the same market fashion of what we're seeing today, and end up with vacant property. The Housing Crisis Act, other state laws like no net loss, these are new laws that we as a city are mandated to maintain and keep up with, that our general plan just isn't acknowledging or doesn't speak to, and therefore our implementation documents don't speak to them because they didn't exist when we updated our general plan comprehensively.
Now, for that last one, repeat what you just said, that last part.
So both of these laws as examples
Yeah.
came after we updated our general plan comprehensively.
So are we following those laws?
We are, but it poses a really significant challenge because our patterns of development, our densities, didn't take into account these mandates.
Got it, okay.
So it's a struggle to ensure we comply with state law, but also follow the intent and the vision of our general plan.
Understood.
Can you just share more about so, you know, obviously we follow state law, but just like the challenges, like specifically, is it just having to do double work because you're having to, you know, make two things, you know, two documents that don't talk to each other, right? So you're having to kind of devote double staff time to something. Can you just kind of give more like tangible examples of the challenges you face because of that?
Sure. So I think one of the challenges staff faces is there is a lot of, the state has implemented a less restriction on housing development, so to speak. It's a lot more onerous for jurisdictions to deny housing. Mm-hmm. And our general plan is based on policy that doesn't necessarily align with some of those state mandates. So when we get development.
So I'm gonna put it simpler.
Okay.
So Prop S had a very specific course. We were the fastest rising, one of the most growing communities. Prop S sought to slow that down by creating this barrier about changing land use. So now you have developers coming to us who have opportunities in other places to do development, and they're getting financing to do that development in specific areas. And staff is pretzeled between a document that tells them to do something else and the market and the demands of the market to construct it, how to get those things done. And I think three of us saw that often what in the presentation that Cal Cities did about how expensive property development is and how expensive actually multifamily family development is more expensive than single family development. And then you compound that with infill development actually being even more expensive. And these are some of the conversations that ultimately we're going to have to wrestle with about, do you incentivize what you're doing in certain areas to create opportunity to address the fact that it's more expensive to build one place or another. But back to their challenge is trying to reconcile all that with a document and some very, very well crafted proposition that seeks to limit these opportunities, right? So that was, they contradict each other and they're pointing you in different direction. And staff you'll hear from your city attorney, they're legally bound to defend that proposition.
And that's also why we see these really is this also a reason why we see these really kind of odd, they look kind of piecemeal. When we're approving a project, there is like 4 actions or 5 actions in one, is because it's kind of, I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But sometimes, right, when we have motions, it's like we have to do this and this and this. I don't know if that contributes to it, but.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
That's our zoning code.
Got it.
But remember, our zoning code doesn't match our.
Yes. In short, it contradicts each other, and then which one do you follow?
Which one? Well, and when somebody comes to do business with you, they might look at one versus the
Right.
other
Yeah.
and think they have a pathway, and then told later, well, actually, no,
Yeah.
that just needed to be updated.
Yeah,
Right?
I get it. Okay, thanks. It's also helpful for me when I speak to the public about why, during these decisions. So that's another reason why I want to be able to explain it to the public as well. Thank you.
So general plan implementation. So we talked about our general plan. We know what a general plan is. How do you implement it? So we talked about the policies and some of the documents that are relied upon for implementation. So you create a big document, and then you create more documents to implement that document. And eventually you get to actions that are the things people care about and see on the ground, right? And so some of these actions that are listed here, we do in fact do. We have safe routes to school programs. We do have infrastructure for pedestrians and bicyclists. The overarching theme here, though, is that it's all supposed to be consistent. There's supposed to be a woven theme of consistency amongst all of these documents, and the actions you see are consistent with those adopted policies. Updating a general plan. So I've mentioned that the city is currently updating a couple of elements. This is very different than a comprehensive general plan update. So when I'm talking about a comprehensive general plan update, we are looking at every chapter. We're opening it up. We're creating new sets of visions, potentially. We're substantively, significantly, potentially changing the policy, the direction, the vision for the city. These more focused updates that are currently underway really are for the purpose of maintaining consistency with state law, right? To ensure that we are doing what is necessary to not potentially be pursued by state agencies for non-compliance with state law. So I want to just clarify, when we're talking here, we're talking about a very large process versus these smaller focused processes that staff have been working through or are working through. So when we are talking about a comprehensive update, we're talking about things like looking at past challenges, analyzing those past challenges, and doing the same with accomplishments. What were the lessons that we learned, right? We examine current trends and current data. So there's a lot of current contemporary analysis that is happening and looking towards emerging trends. What do we think is going to be coming? What is potentially going to be happening? That turns into this consideration of just ultimately future issues, future challenges that could be faced. I think very few jurisdictions had pandemics in their general plan prior to 2020. I guarantee you most updated general plans now, their safety elements probably have some reference to additional types of issues like COVID-19, right? So really trying to look toward that. and setting goals, right? Reestablishing, revision goals for the general plan. And it has an extensive amount of community outreach and engagement, right? The general plan is that foundational document for the jurisdiction, for the city, and the idea is that while the decision makers, the electeds, are the ones running and pushing that forward with the assistance of staff, the public is providing a great deal of input and providing that kind of the wind in your sails, right? They're helping shape that. A lot of comprehensive general plan updates are done specifically as a general plan update and then phase the implementation, right? So it would be, in my opinion, very aggressive to try and update your general plan comprehensively and then at the same time update your zoning ordinance and your zoning map and your specific plans. You typically see jurisdictions phasing that through, with the general plan being phase one, because again, that's the overarching lead policy document. What typically happens with comprehensive general plan updates is also comprehensive environmental review. So as part of the general plan update process, it is technically considered a project under CEQA if it's a comprehensive update. And so you're going to have some level of environmental review. The goal here is that the environmental review you're doing is at a large enough level, a programmatic enough level, that you create streamlining downstream for private and public development projects that implement that general plan, that facilitate a faster environmental review process for implementation. So that is a huge positive with comprehensively updating your general plan. So just looking back at our 2012 general plan update, what that community outreach and engagement looked like to give everyone an idea. One of the backbone pieces of it was this citizens committee that was established. It was roughly 15 folks comprised of public stakeholders, so private business, just residents, community members, city staff, and it,
No, that is not something.
It sounds like.
Yeah, maybe that's all. Especially with the helicopter in there last one.
it's in there.
Sounds like firecrackers.
It wasn't shots? No, we don't know you.
Let folks settle.
Okay. Obviously, they didn't see my Facebook post the other day.
But don't delete votes.
Yeah.
Well, happy January 20th.
Oh, it is in here.
It is in
We're celebrating.
Well,
Go ahead.
exciting, general
Sorry about
plans.
I can tell you're very excited, by the way. I've never seen you so excited.
This is what I like.
I figured this was your passion. I'm like, I've never seen her so giddy on her presentation.
So I have a question.
Sure. Right?
So for the big one, we need voter voting. And for the other ones, we don't?
Comprehensive ones.
So Proposition S covers certain components of the general plan as they pertain to increasing density and changing the residential land use designations. And so on the comprehensive update, you're theoretically doing that. And that is what we did in 2012. We increased densities in certain places. And so because the proposed general plan update included that and triggered Prop S, those portions had to go to a vote. So in the focused updates that we're working on, we're not triggering Prop S. We're not touching densities or residential land uses. We're working outside that.
But there is a moment that if we continue updating in a much larger scale, we will be having to go to the public for voting.
I think technically under Prop S, yes, I look at the city, our city.
So
education.
we'll talk more about that in detail, but last time we did do a comprehensive plan, we took elements of it to the voters.
The general plan does not require a vote, right?
So
If it's
under
comprehensive, does it?
state law, like if we didn't have Proposition S, there is no requirement from the state to have it done through a vote of the people.
But Prop S requires general plan.
Requires that if we're modifying the residential densities, we're changing certain residential land uses.
So when we do a comprehensive general plan update, that will go to the voters.
The portions that trigger Prop S, correct?
Got it.
Theoretically. if Prop S.
Prop S is a very sophisticated way to freeze in time certain elements of the general plan and make it very challenging to change those elements of the general plan.
Wow, freezing time, that's pretty heavy language.
That's
All
unfortunate.
right, I'll be quiet now.
Tell me later.
Keep eating my chips.
So just jumping back in,
Yes.
the Citizens Committee, several individuals, over 15 from my count. I had to go back, I was not around for this. So I had to go back and look at agendas and count who was there.
Yeah, curious.
From what I can tell, they met over 10 times. I would argue they probably met over a dozen times, but I could at least count 11. And this committee was exactly that, right? Recurring to talk about structural issues around the comprehensive general plan update. They met in this room many times. They also, the staff working on the comprehensive update also held public workshops. So not just meetings specific to the committee, but general public open workshops to come and talk about the comprehensive plan. They were structured, right? You structure these workshops. It's not a free-for-all of just, hey, come in and we'll talk about the general plan. There was an active webpage for the comprehensive update. There were public notices surrounding a lot of these meetings and workshops. Of course, they went back to boards and commissions with updates. They went back to the council, to the planning commission. And then they did a lot of presentations to interest groups and other types of ancillary commissions. I call them ancillary because planning, right, focus. But the Chamber of Commerce, the various school boards, the traffic, what is formerly known as the Traffic Commission here at the city. Now it's a much longer name that I admittedly don't know. So you can see there was a significant amount of outreach, and this went on for well over 18 months, this process of outreach and engagement. So it's not a couple of meetings here or there, it is a through line of an update. And that brings me to this slide, which is just a really, really high level overview of what a comprehensive update may look like. And that is, as you can see, outreach and engagement is really running the entire time. It's an underpinning of that process, and it's done in a number of ways. For our safety element update in compliance with SB 1000, for example, we created an outreach and engagement plan to identify how we were going to do this outreach and engagement. You can use things like community surveys, obviously the things we just touched on that they did in 2012. Typically then you're going to do a baseline assessment, right? Existing conditions, you're going to look at trends, and that's going to be information from outreach and engagement, these analyses and assessments that work to create your policy. And during this entire time, you're working on your environmental review, right? The environmental review and the general plan are two separate documents and two separate processes, but they're all dependent upon one another. And eventually you get to a place where you're hopefully adopting your new comprehensive general plan and you're certifying your environmental document that is going to then help facilitate implementation. So next steps, what does that look like? My understanding is you all have a visioning workshop coming up. And as I mentioned earlier, the city staff are going to continue to work on our focused updates that we've been working on in order to comply with state law and work through our CATS, Comprehensive Active Transportation Strategy. And those are really where we currently are from staff's perspective in terms of general plan updates, and that concludes my workshop presentation. I'm more than happy to answer any additional questions, and I have some resources up here, so I'm happy to share this presentation.
we have any public comments?
None.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation. I'm all for this. That's really my only comment.
I just wanted to say I feel very special because I feel like this was all for me. And I've been chasing this information down, but thank you very much. And I agree with you, Mayor.
Thank you for your great presentation and enthusiasm on the topic.
I will nerd out with whoever wants to nerd out on this.
I do have one question.
Sure.
And it's a general question. I think the answer is going to be it depends.
No plan.
Just saying. Yeah, right? So, you went over the goals, you went over the policies within each goal. Is the abundance of the policies that you see within goals, does it typically provide more clarity and guidance, or does it provide more confusion and contradiction whenever there's a project that's in front of you? It doesn't depend.
You're asking in the context of our general plan or like theoretically?
Our general.
For the most part, clarity.
Okay.
However, when you're, again, trying to take it in the context of today,
Yes.
it can be challenging.
Well, and I think that there is something to be said about if we do launch into the process, understanding that, and I think they heard it firsthand, that the difference between should and shall, and that keeping that in mind, that you should do some things and you may want to have that vision, but you always want to have the ability to be adaptable, right? Because that's, I think, some of the challenges, and that's the challenges with something like Prop S. Prop S isn't very adaptable, it has a very set goal. And when you think about those things, what's happened in the last 30 years is we haven't experienced change in this cycle like this ever before. And I think that's one of the challenges with a document like the general plans, and this is general plans for everybody, is we didn't have, general plan came out of from planners trying to think about the world in a very measured pace, that there'd be time to do implementation and the world wouldn't shift as radically as it has, right? And that's back to Veronica's point about what you include in it today and what you look at it may be very different. But even if you look at some of what we're doing, those are optional elements, and a lot of communities would tell you those are essential. Now, some of the things that the state sees as optional, our community might look as essential, right? And so it should be working that way. But I think it's the change, like Veronica said, that we've experienced that has put us in a different place as it relates to the general.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody to add anything to the future agenda? All right, council members, subcommittee reports and other reports. Christian Garcia.
Yes, okay. First off, Love Esco Day. It's going to be, is it this weekend? February 1st, Saturday, February 1st. Hope to see everybody there. It's going to be a lot of fun, lots of opportunities to go help out people, help out the community, do cleanups, blood drives, etc. As always, meeting up with lots of constituents, meeting up with lots of constituents, asking what it is that they need. I went to a DBA mixer last week as well. That was really informative. The DBA mixer, we're providing clarity on what it is that they're looking for with the grand project, with the reconstruction that's happening, and also just kind of how to enhance and protect what we're building there. I also went to a historic Escondido Historic District meeting. That was really informative. I learned a lot there. I have a CEA meeting tomorrow, Clean Energy Alliance meeting tomorrow. I'll keep you guys updated on that. And as always, thank you to my community for the privilege of serving.
Councilman Garcia?
Yes, well, as probably some of my colleagues have mentioned, a number of us were at Cal City's meeting in Sacramento. I also had the privilege to attend there, the New Mayor's Council Academy. Learned a lot, and for me, really the highlight was the information, the seminar, the class that we took regarding the land use. And after being even on planning for a number of years, and it was not only a good refresher, but a lot of great information. So I encourage any of my other colleagues that haven't had an opportunity to take that, to do so, because it is really worth it. The other thing I just would like to let everyone know, I have the privilege to have been appointed to the Public Safety Committee for Cal Cities here in California. And I also, while I was over there, received an email that I have been appointed for the National League of Cities to the Large Cities Council. So I'm really excited to be able to represent not only our city, but to serve on those committees and be able to have, that we have a voice at the table. So I'm really excited about that and just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Councilmember Fitzgerald?
I too was away in Sacramento at the training, which was very informative, eye-opening, so I really appreciated that. This Saturday at the mall, we're going to be having an event at Shabbat, which is, have you heard of, it's essentially it serves people of low income, mothers to go in there and get diapers, food, and if they can't afford it, sometimes it's just free. So they're going to have just a Love You Day. It's going to be this Saturday from 11 to 3. And then also La Vesco this Saturday morning. Today was really good. We and most of us were there for the Creek Trail event, you know, the celebration, and I just am excited with the direction that we're going and partnering with the local indigenous tribes, and they're investing in the city. So there's a lot more of that to come.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes, so yes, League of Cities Conference was great. I felt like this time they just gave a lot of new information. I appreciated the workshop on land use. And last Monday, I participated in the NAACP's North County chapter Martin Luther King Day, their community prayer breakfast. I go every year, so it was great to be there with them. I was also at the groundbreaking event for the long-awaited Escondido Creek Trail improvements. Really exciting to be there to see that happening. I will be at Love Esco Day on Saturday, and I also have a project through Love Esco, a community cleanup the following week, because it's the whole month of February, you know, that there'll be events. And so my next community cleanup is Saturday, February 8th, 9 a.m. We're gonna meet at the Escondido Chamber of Commerce parking lot. So you can sign up through Love Esco or volunteer.escondido.org. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
All right, I have no report. Everything I have has already been said. City Manager?
Nothing to report.
All right, this meeting's adjourned.
All right.
Send the best.